A couple of things on that to set this up. You have analysts who say, such as people from Deutsche Bank, that the recovery would be halted if Congress doesn't continue the tax cuts to everyone, even high wage earners. On the other hand, critics say it would take borrowing of $700 billion to pay for the tax cuts to the wealthier segment of America. Two stark contrasts. I'm not sure what the voters are to make of those kinds of things. In fact, by one poll, they're completely split. Some say only for those under 200,000, and about the other half of America says all the way around. What do you say, Mayor Callahan?
I am in favor of extending the tax cuts for 98% of Americans in this country. I do not believe that we should borrow more money from China to give millionaires and billionaires a tax cut that we can't afford. Charlie Dent has voted for an increase of $3 trillion in this country's debt, and a tripling of our federal deficit. Now, $700 billion, which is what those tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires will cost us, is yet another burden that we're going to pass on to our kids and to our grandkids. That $3 trillion in additional debt is $10,000 for every man, woman, and child in this country. My record on reducing debt is in the 6 years that I've been mayor, we have $60 million less debt today than when I took office in 2004. So I am not in favor of increasing this country's deficit by $700 billion and passing that burden on to our kids and our grandkids to borrow that money and pass that on to our kids.
Well, let me switch things up. Jake Towne, a quick reply on the tax cuts. Everybody or just the folks who make under 200?
I'm for extending these tax cuts. However, what I would actually...
For all Americans.
For all Americans. But what I would do also is I think that certainly what a lot of people, when you look at the income tax, for instance, you could eliminate the federal income tax for 50% of the population of the United States and only lose 3% of that entire revenue. And it's a huge amount to those households. It's not a whole lot to the federal government. And if you want to be serious about, addressing these things and getting people back on their feet, because the whole thing is we should not be raising taxes during an economic depression. That is exactly the wrong thing to do. It's the wrong recipe for success. And even if we don't do that, we could do a temporary income tax holiday for several months. And that's the whole thing, is like the whole problem that we have is being caused by Congress. It's being caused by this excessive federal spending. That's what we need to get away from.
Charlie Dent?
Well, it's shameful that Congress adjourned. Speaker Pelosi adjourned the House without dealing with these 2001-2003 tax cuts. The issue is, do we want a massive tax increase come January 1? My opponent, John Callahan, has just said he does. And he's also redefined millionaire. If you make $200,000 or $250,000, you are now a millionaire, according to John Callahan. That's an interesting point. Nevertheless, what's going to happen is this tax increase will fall most heavily upon small businesses. Small businesses are organized as Subchapter S, partnerships, proprietorships. They pay the individual rates. Those rates will go up. Half of the income that's going to be subjected to this tax is coming out of small business. This is a huge... We can, on the one hand, ask small businesses to get us out from under this recession and create jobs. On the other hand, tell them we're going to raise their taxes. There is uncertainty driven by this failure to act. I mean, there will be tax hikes on savings, investment, income, married couples, families with children.
He did say, though, Congressman, that it's a very small sliver of the population that would be affected by the taxes going back.
But it is small business income that is largely going to be taxed. About half that revenue is certainly off the income taxes. My opponent is just that he's got a record of raising taxes.
All right. 97% of small businesses will not be impacted by this tax. The leader of his own party, John Boehner, admitted that. All right, let's talk about the 3% of the quote-unquote small businesses that will be impacted by not extending this tax. Remember, 98% of Americans get the tax cut. The wealthiest 2% would not. 97% of small business will have no impact as a result of that. 3% will. Let's talk about one of those businesses. PricewaterhouseCoopers grossed $26 billion last year, Rob. Does that meet a definition of a small business by your standard or anybody's standard that's watching this program? I don't think so. Those are the type of small businesses that Charlie Dent's concerned about. Those are not the kind of small businesses that I'm worried about.
You couldn't be more wrong.
$700 billion was more debt on our kids to give Pricewaterhouse
even John Callahan has to admit that most small businesses are organized as partnerships, proprietorships, subchapter S corporations. They pay the individual
will not be impacted regardless of how they're organized.
50% of the income will be that's going to be taxes coming right out of small business. You know, he wants to punish small businesses. It is that simple. He talks about spending and debt. He mentions $3 trillion. What he doesn't tell you is the policies that he has supported. He's the candidate of these Washington policies. The health care law, $2.6 trillion program when fully implemented. The stimulus, that's over $1 trillion, all borrowed. You've added $4.4 trillion in baseline spending.
I'm not a member of Congress.
But you supported all that.
You have been a member of Congress for 6 years.
But you're
voted. You actually voted for a $3 trillion. You did a $3 trillion increase in our debt.
John,
are you denying that?
You're so fundamentally dishonest.
Are you denying that?
I am telling you that you've supported $4.4 trillion worth of new spending. But did you not support the
gentlemen? When Congressman Dent went into Congress, the national debt was $7.6 trillion. It's now $13.5 trillion. It didn't get to be that way without a lot of spending occurring and a lot of yes votes by Mr. Dent for that spending. However, and again, we should not be raising taxes in an economic depression. Third, what we need to realize is the true national debt is not just the $13.5 trillion in the Treasury market. It's also all the unfunded liabilities into the future. When you look at the unfunded liabilities per the United States Treasury in our country, it's $107 trillion for the Social Security and Medicare. That's a little bit under $400,000 for every man, woman, and child. So let's have a frank discussion here. Let's get this all out here. I'm for balancing the budget, not spending more than we bring in, period.
We're 100 miles from that right now. Is there any way to get anywhere toward that?
Two budgets, the 2006 and 2007 budgets. And actually the budget deficits came down. For the two budgets I voted for. I voted against these budgets, which apparently my opponent supports, because since President Obama, his first budget he presented and I voted against, he will double the national debt in 5 years, and he will triple it in 10 years. And you've added $4.4 trillion, $4.4 trillion of new baseline spending added in 31 months since Speaker Pelosi took over. She's supporting you. She sent you a lot of money. She wants you to rubber stamp her agenda.
Rob, we all know. I mean, and the viewers know what's happened in this country with our debt and deficit in the last 6 years. It's about time that Charlie Dent, who's been in Congress under Republican presidents, Democratic presidents, Republican leadership of Congress, and Democratic leadership of Congress, begin to take a little ownership for the votes that he's made.
Can we talk about
this? Is
if you believe the poll, if you believe the polls,
talking about the problem.
Hold on, please. If you believe the polls, as voters reflect on what has been happening for a few years now, and they're asked about the mess and who's responsible, the polls would seem to indicate, I'm just nudging back a little bit, Mr. Callahan, that people are primed and ready in the month from now to send a message to Democrats to want to hold them responsible for the current state of affairs. President Obama, on the other hand, of course, says he inherited much of what we have. But what do you say to that?
The fact of the matter is,
I mean, Democrats are running up against it a bit. Right?
But this is a very anti-incumbent environment. Naturally, if the Democrats are in charge of Congress and Democrats are in charge of the White House and people are not happy where things are right now, they're going to blame the party in charge. But we can't forget, Rob, who was there for the last 6 years and who supported the failed economic policies that led to the recession in the first place, that led to the need for an $850 billion bailout of Wall Street. That's the facts. And it's about time that Charlie Dent, who's been in Washington for 6 years, takes some ownership for the role that he's played in supporting those failed economic policies.
Ownership we talk about budget deficits. Let's talk about John Callahan in the city of Bethlehem. He's run deficits $8.5 million. His own auditors have said so. Don Cunningham, your friend, has said he has said you're operating in the red. Your city councilman Davey Jacinto has said it's a financial disaster.
This takes me into
you can't even balance your own budget.
This takes me into a direction of that I had hoped to go a little bit later, but I knew one thing would obviously dovetail with another. And one question might be, as we think about records, your record is as mayor of Bethlehem, and yours as a member of Congress for the past 6 years. The situation in Bethlehem is that germane. He's running a city, and he's running for Congress. So to nudge back in your direction just for a second, Congressman Dent, in what way is it germane that he may, arguably, one way, I don't know which, had difficulty with balancing the budget of Bethlehem. How is that germane to this?
Well, first, his argument for his candidacy is that he says that he's been a good mayor, so that's the reason to vote for him. I'm saying he's not been a very good mayor. In fact, his budgets are a disaster. He's averaged spending increases of over 9% each year. I mean, those are the realities of, he promised that, he said in exchange for a casino, we'd have an immediate property tax cut in Bethlehem. It did not happen. You said it in 2005, John. I'll have to we'll be happy to furnish the public statement. We'll be happy to furnish the statement, but these are the promises you made. You promised a casino to the people of Bethlehem in exchange for a property tax cut. It has not happened, and it's not going to happen. You need to balance your budget.
My record as mayor is most certainly germane, and I'm very proud of it, all right? This is my record, both around jobs and in fiscal responsibility as mayor of the city of Bethlehem. $2 billion of economic investment, 5,000 new jobs in 6 years. $60 million less debt today than when I took office 6 years ago. $10 million slashing of government waste. And in the last 3 years, the violent crime rate in the city of Bethlehem has dropped by 25%. We are the safest city in Pennsylvania. I will put my fiscal record of lowering debt, balancing budgets, and cutting government waste up against Charlie Dent's fiscal record in Washington any day.
Clarify one thing. I have a few Facebook folks who are following along and who have asked a few questions, and it turns out one of them dovetails with this subject here, and that person has asked, what about my property tax reduction based on casino revenue? I don't know if she didn't identify herself as
Well, there's been some confusion about property tax reduction as it relates to casino revenue. There has been a reduction in school property taxes as a result of the tax that the state puts on gaming, and folks have gotten that. In Pennsylvania or in Bethlehem, it averages about $170. Okay, that's for your school district taxes. The fact of the matter is, Rob, that the city of Bethlehem property taxes have not gone up in 4 years. It's the longest period of time in 30 years that property taxes in the city of Bethlehem have not gone up. That's a fact. Now, I have talked about how we're going to use the proceeds of gaming that come to Bethlehem as a result of the host fees, different from the tax for school district property tax reduction. Host fees that we have shared with Allentown to the tune of over $3 million, host fees that we have shared with Easton to the tune of $450,000. I, as the mayor of the city of Bethlehem, have helped Allentown and Easton as a result of that project in Bethlehem. I have been very clear about what I'm going to do with the proceeds of the gaming dollars. We're going to invest them back. We're going to stabilize the city's finances. We're going to deal with the impacts of gaming, which is what that fee is for in the city of Bethlehem. And ultimately, we are going to be able to reduce property taxes.
Mr. Dent, that does not satisfy you.
Well, no. He actually raised, he supported property.
It's what I've said since 2006.
He supported property taxes increases 4 years in a row, and even raised his pay in one of those years. But what he's also not telling you is the promise he made on the property tax reduction in exchange for hosting casino was made in 2005. You came up with your 4-point plan after the fact.
The host
also, John has talked about.
Allentown got $3 million.
Also, John has talked.
That's how you work with the region.
Campaign. Go ahead.
Campaign. Well, the other thing too. He also talked about crime. It's you should know that the Fraternal Order of Police has endorsed my candidacy. State FOP, Allentown, Lehampton, and I even believe the city of Bethlehem FOP has recommended me as well to the state FOP. So I am the candidate of law enforcement in this race. It may come as a shock to you. No, I can assure you that's why I have the strong support of our men and women in uniform.
All right, listen, Mr. Jake Towne, we've had you on the sideline for a second as we talked about the congressman's record and the mayor's record. That obviously leaves you out for just a moment, but do you care about any of this discussion?
Well, let's look at the record of not these two individuals, but let's look at the record of the Republican and Democratic parties. What our country really has is a two-headed one-party system that's completely failed the American people. I mean, the Republicans, who are supposed to be fiscal conservatives, they go into Congress and they, from under President Bush, and they increase the size of the federal spending by 70%. And then Democrats go in right in there and they just continue the same practices. Let's actually ask a question that has a whole lot of meaning going forward, which is the Federal Reserve, which is the money printing arm of Congress, is about to embark on what's known as quantitative easing, where they're going to buy $500 billion to $2 trillion worth of debt. What is your stance on these policies? Because these policies are going to impact the American people. It's going to lead to a crisis in the dollar, and people will be going out to try and buy things, and they won't be able to do it. Look at what they're doing to our seniors. They're not giving them a pull as well.
That's a question for these guys. Do you regard what he's just brought up as germane, speaking of the word germane?
Well, I'm not going to get into the monetary policy of the Fed.
You know what you're talking about.
You know what? You're asking the questions, Rob. Not Jake.
Well, we're also having a discussion. He wanted to know what you thought about that.
I am concerned about some of the Fed policies. Sure, I am. Who isn't? But I am very concerned about there might be some attempt at some point to monetize the debt. Which will mean inflation at some point.
Doing.
And I am well, we haven't experienced inflation yet, but sometime down the road, not in the near term, but we're very concerned about this. And so there are concerns about the Fed. Absolutely.
You want to take a swing at that, Mr. Callahan?
My record on debt and deficit is clear. I've talked about that. We have $60 million less debt today than when I took office back in 2004. That is John Callahan's record as mayor.
Just to be fair, he was raising it